The call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I was already awake, nursing my second cup of coffee and watching the snow fall outside my kitchen window in Toronto. The number on my phone showed my brother's name, Glenn. We hadn't spoken in 3 weeks, not since our last tense visit to Mom's nursing home. "Douglas," he said. His voice had that false solemnity that immediately put me on edge. "I have some difficult news. Mom passed away last night, peacefully in her sleep." I set down my coffee mug, my hands suddenly unsteady. "What? When? I was just planning to visit her today." "The funeral is Friday," he continued, cutting me off. His tone shifted, becoming almost businesslike. "I've already made the arrangements. Oh, and Douglas, about Mom's estate. The will is very clear. Everything goes to me. The house, the cottage in Muskoka, her investments, all of it. You get nothing. Don't even think about contesting it." Then he hung up. I stood there in my kitchen, staring at the phone in disbelief. My mother? Dead. Just like that. And Glenn's first priority was to tell me I was getting nothing. Not "I'm sorry," not "she went peacefully," just a threat not to contest the will. Something was very, very wrong. Let me back up. My name is Douglas Harrison. I am 64 years old, a retired civil engineer who spent 40 years designing infrastructure across Ontario. My wife, Catherine, passed away 3 years ago from cancer. We had one daughter, Emma, who is now 28 and working as a marine biologist in Vancouver. After Catherine died, I threw myself into volunteering and staying close to Mom. She had been my rock through the grief. My brother Glenn is 4 years younger, 58. We grew up close, playing hockey in the driveway of our old house in North York. But as adults, we drifted. Glenn became a real estate agent, married Patricia, and had 2 kids. On the surface, everything looked fine, but I had noticed things over the years. Glenn was always chasing the next big deal, always stretching himself thin financially. His business had some rough patches. There were whispered conversations at family dinners about investments that went south, and about Patricia working double shifts as a nurse to keep them afloat. Our mother, Helen Harrison, was 85 and had been sharp as a tack her entire life. A retired schoolteacher, she could still recite poetry from memory and beat anyone at Scrabble. She lived independently in her home in Richmond Hill until about 9 months ago, when Glenn convinced her she needed extra help. He suggested becoming her power of attorney just to manage her bills and medical appointments. Mom was hesitant, but Glenn was persuasive. He was her baby boy, after all. That was when everything changed. Within weeks of Glenn getting power of attorney, Mom was suddenly diagnosed with severe dementia. Glenn moved her into a nursing home, Maple Grove Care Center, saying she couldn't live alone anymore. When I visited, I was shocked. My vibrant, witty mother sat in a chair, staring vacantly. She didn't recognize me. She barely spoke. And when she did, it was confused and fragmented. "Is this really possible?" I asked her doctor, Dr. James Whitmore. "She was fine 2 months ago." "Dementia can progress very rapidly in some cases," he said smoothly. "Cognitive decline at her age can be quite sudden." But it didn't sit right with me. I visited Mom 3 times a week anyway. Even when she didn't know who I was, I would hold her hand and tell her about Emma, about the volunteer projects I was working on. Glenn visited too, but far less often. When he did, he always seemed rushed, always checking his watch. Now, standing in my kitchen with Glenn's words still ringing in my ears, I finally realized what I had been too blind to see. This wasn't grief. This was greed. I called Maple Grove Care Center immediately. "I'm calling about my mother, Helen Harrison," I said when someone finally answered. "I just heard she passed away last night." There was a pause. "I'm sorry, Ms. Harrison," the nurse said, "but I don't have any record of that. Let me check her room." My heart started pounding. A few minutes later, the nurse came back online. "Ma'am, your mother is fine. She's having breakfast right now. Is there some confusion?" I sat down heavily. "Can you do me a favor? Please don't tell anyone I called, especially not my brother." I hung up and immediately dialed my daughter. Emma answered on the 3rd ring, sounding worried. "Mom, it's barely 7 in the morning there. What's wrong?" "Your uncle just told me Grandma died, but she didn't. She's alive. Emma, I think Glenn is trying to steal her estate." There was a long silence. "Mom, that's elder abuse. That's fraud. What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet, but I need to figure this out fast. He said the funeral is Friday. That's 3 days from now." After talking to Emma, I spent the entire morning making calls. First, I contacted a lawyer I had worked with before on a construction contract dispute, Robert Chen. I explained the situation. "Douglas, this is serious," Robert said. "If your brother has power of attorney and is misrepresenting your mother's condition or misappropriating her assets, we're talking about criminal charges, but you need evidence, solid evidence." Next, I hired a private investigator, Sarah Mitchell. She came to my house that afternoon, a sharp woman in her mid-40s with gray streaks running through her dark hair. "How long has your brother had power of attorney?" she asked, taking notes. 9 months, right after Mom supposedly developed dementia. Before that, she was completely competent. She was volunteering at the library, playing bridge twice a week. Then suddenly she couldn't even remember her own name. Sarah nodded. "I've seen cases like this. Give me 48 hours. I'll find out what's happening with your mother's finances." That evening, I drove to Maple Grove. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. When I reached Mom's room, she was sitting in her usual chair by the window, staring out at the darkening sky. Her gray hair was thinner now, her face more lined than I remembered. But something about her seemed different tonight, less drugged, more present. "Mom?" I said softly, pulling up a chair beside her. She turned slowly, those familiar brown eyes meeting mine. There was something in them, recognition, or maybe I was just hoping. "It's me, Douglas, your daughter." She blinked, her mouth moving like she wanted to say something. Then a nurse came in to check her vitals, and the moment was gone. I drove home through the snow, my mind racing. What was Glenn planning? A fake funeral to convince everyone Mom was dead? Then what? Transfer all her assets while everyone believed she was gone? It was insane, and yet I was realizing it was also potentially brilliant in its audacity. Sarah called me the next morning. "Douglas, you need to sit down." I sat at my kitchen table, the phone pressed to my ear. "Your brother has been very busy," Sarah said. "In the past 8 months, he's transferred approximately $280,000 from your mother's accounts into his own. He sold her cottage in Muskoka to a numbered company, which I'm still tracing, but I suspect he's behind it. He's also been using her credit cards. And Douglas, the doctor who diagnosed your mother with dementia, Dr. James Whitmore, he went to university with your brother. They've been friends for 30 years. I felt sick. "So Mom's dementia could be medication-induced," I said. "If she's being overprescribed with sedatives or antipsychotics, that would explain the sudden cognitive decline and her vacant behavior. That's attempted murder. That's what we need to prove." "I'm getting copies of her medical records, but that takes time," Sarah replied. "In the meantime, I suggest you visit your mother again. Document everything. Record any conversations with your brother if you can. Ontario is a one-party consent province." That afternoon, I was back at Maple Grove. I had my phone ready to record anything suspicious, but when I got to Mom's room, it was empty. A nurse I didn't recognize was changing the sheets. "Where's my mother?" I asked, panic rising. "Oh, Miss Harrison, your brother took her out for a drive. He said she needed some air." My blood ran cold. "When?" "About an hour ago." I ran to the parking lot, but Glenn's black Mercedes was already gone. I tried calling him. No answer. I called 5 times. Nothing. Finally, 3 hours later, they returned. Glenn helped Mom out of the car, supporting her as she shuffled back toward her room. She looked exhausted, confused, barely able to stand. Glenn saw me waiting in the hallway. "Douglas," he said, not even bothering to hide his annoyance, "what are you doing here? You said Mom died yesterday, yet here she is." He actually laughed. "Oh, that? Yeah, sorry about the confusion. I meant to call you back, false alarm. Mom had a bad episode yesterday, and I thought, well, you know how dementia is." "Where did you take her today?" "Just for a drive. She likes getting out." "Really? Because she looks like she can barely stand." "Back off, Douglas." His voice dropped, turning cold. "I'm her power of attorney. I make the decisions about her care, not you. You want to challenge that? Get a lawyer." He brushed past me, helping Mom into her room. Through the doorway, I watched him settle her into her chair, speaking to her in a low voice I couldn't hear. Then he left, not even looking at me as he walked away. I was about to leave when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello?" Silence. Then a whisper. A woman's voice, faint and scratchy. "Douglas." "Yes? Who is this?" "Douglas. It's me." The voice was so quiet, I had to press the phone hard against my ear. "Who?" "It's your mother." I froze. That couldn't be. Mom was right there in her room. I checked the screen. A blocked number. "Douglas, listen carefully. I don't have much time. I need you to come to my room tonight, late, after 10. Make sure Glenn isn't here. And Douglas, don't tell anyone about this call." The line went dead. I stood in the parking lot, snow falling around me, staring at my phone like it had turned into something alien. That was impossible. Mom could barely string 2 words together. And yet that voice, even whispered and strained, had sounded like her. The real her. I waited in my car until after 10 p.m., watching the nursing home. Glenn's Mercedes was long gone. The night shift was on. Just a skeleton crew. I used my key code to enter through the side door and made my way to Mom's room. She was sitting up in bed, the lights low. When I entered, she turned to look at me. And in the dim light, I saw her eyes. Clear, focused, completely lucid. "Close the door," she said in a normal voice. Not the confused mumble I'd heard for months. A strong, steady voice. I shut the door, my hands shaking. "Mom, what?" "Sit down, sweetheart," she said. "We need to talk, and we don't have much time." I sat there, completely stunned. "Are you okay? What's happening?" My mother, who I had believed was lost in the fog of dementia, smiled at me. She actually smiled, with that wry expression I remembered from childhood, when she used to catch Glenn and me sneaking cookies before dinner. "I'm fine, Douglas. I've been fine this whole time. But the dementia, the diagnosis, you couldn't even recognize me, because I was pretending." The room seemed to tilt. "Pretending?" She reached for my hand. Her grip was firm and steady, nothing like the weak, trembling hands I had held for months. "Douglas, I'm 85 years old. I've been thinking a lot about mortality, about what happens when I'm gone. And I realized I needed to know something. I needed to know which of my sons would actually take care of me, not for my money, not for inheritance, but because they loved me. So you faked dementia to test us?" When Glenn suggested becoming my power of attorney, I saw an opportunity. I agreed, but I also consulted my own lawyer, someone Glenn doesn't know about. I put most of my assets into an irrevocable trust weeks before Glenn got the POA. The accounts he has access to? I left just enough for them to see what he would do. I could barely process it. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes softened with sadness. "Because I had to test both of you. I had to see who would visit me when I couldn't give anything back, who would hold my hand even when I didn't know their name. And Douglas, you came 3 times a week. You talked to me. You stayed with me, even when I acted like I had no idea who you were." Tears rolled down my face. "Of course I did. You're my mother." "But Glenn," she shook her head. "Glenn failed, Douglas. Worse than I ever imagined. I've been documenting everything. Every time he pressured me to sign papers, every time he got angry when I acted confused, every time he took something from this room, thinking I wouldn't notice. I recorded it all." The $280,000. He took it from the accounts I left open on purpose. I've been letting him dig his own grave. "Mom, he told me you were dead. He's planning a funeral for Friday." She nodded. "I know. He told me during our drive today. He said I was going to have an accident, that I would pass away peacefully. He wanted me to sign everything first, but I refused and pretended not to understand. He's running out of time." "This is insane. This is dangerous. We need to call the police." "Not yet," she said calmly. "Robert Chen, your lawyer, has been my lawyer too for the past month. We have a plan. I just need you to trust me." I squeezed her hand. "Always." Over the next 2 days, everything was set in motion. Robert quietly involved the police. They agreed to let Glenn continue so they could catch him with undeniable evidence. Hidden cameras were placed in Mom's room. Trusted staff were informed. And Mom kept acting. Glenn came twice more. The first time, he brought documents for her to sign, papers transferring the house. Mom scribbled something illegible and acted confused. Glenn's frustration was barely contained. "Just sign clearly, Mom," he said through clenched teeth. "I'm trying to help you." The second time, Thursday night, he brought a syringe. When I later saw the footage, it made me physically sick. He told her it was her medication. It wasn't. It was a massive dose of sedatives, enough to knock out a horse. Mom pretended to take it and secretly hid it. "Tomorrow," Glenn whispered, smoothing her hair. "Tomorrow you'll finally be at peace, Mom. No more suffering." Friday came. Glenn had booked Thornhill Funeral Home. He had sent notices, called relatives. Even distant cousins called with condolences. I played along. "Yes, it's at 2. Yes, it was sudden." The chapel was full, flowers everywhere. A huge photo of Mom from 20 years ago sat at the front. Glenn had even written an obituary about her long illness. I sat in the front row with Emma, who had flown in that morning. Glenn sat across the aisle with Patricia and their children. His face was calm, sorrowful. His kids looked genuinely devastated. At exactly 2 p.m., Glenn stood to give the eulogy. "We're here today to celebrate the life of Helen Margaret Harrison, born February 14, 1939, passed away January 7, 2025. He went on about what a wonderful mother she was. And in her final months, he said, she trusted me to care for her. She knew I would protect her interests. She even told me I was her favorite, the one she trusted to handle everything. I stood up. "That's interesting, Glenn," I said loudly. "Want to tell everyone where Mom really is right now?" The room fell silent. "Douglas, sit down." "Where's her body, Glenn?" "She's being cremated. We discussed this." "Really? Because I called the crematorium. They don't have her." Patricia grabbed his arm. "Glenn, what is he talking about?" At that moment, the doors at the back of the chapel opened, and there she was, my mother, walking in with a walker, back straight, eyes sharp. 2 police officers followed behind her. The room exploded with gasps and screams. Mom walked down the aisle and stopped in front of Glenn. "Hello, son," she said calmly. "I'm not dead, but your inheritance is." Glenn stared at her in horror. "Mom, you're confused." "I'm not confused. I've recorded everything, every threat, every theft, every time you tried to drug me, every document you tried to make me sign." She turned to the stunned crowd. "I'm sorry for deceiving you," she said, "but I had to know the truth." One of the officers stepped forward. "Glenn Harrison, you are under arrest for elder abuse, theft over $5,000, fraud, and attempted probate fraud. You have the right to remain silent." Glenn tried to run. He actually tried to push past the officer and bolt for the door, but he barely made it 3 steps before he was tackled and handcuffed. His children were sobbing. Patricia stood frozen, her face a mask of horror. As they led Glenn away, he shouted back at Mom, "I'm your son! You can't do this to me! I needed that money!" Mom watched him go, tears streaming down her face, but her voice was steady. "You were my son, Glenn, but you stopped being my child the moment you decided my life was worth less than my bank account." The legal process took months. Glenn tried to fight the charges at first, claiming Mom was incompetent and that he had only been trying to help, but the evidence was overwhelming. There was video footage of him trying to force her to sign documents, audio recordings of his threats, bank records proving the theft. And finally, Dr. Whitmore testified after being granted immunity. He admitted Glenn had pressured him to prescribe unnecessary medications to keep Mom sedated and compliant. In the end, Glenn pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, ordered to repay the $280,000 he had stolen, plus $50,000 in fines. His real estate license was permanently revoked. Patricia divorced him and was granted full custody of their children. They were heartbroken, but Emma and I did our best to stay in their lives, to be the stable family they needed. Dr. Whitmore lost his medical license. The College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario did not show mercy. Mom moved into a small condo near my house. She was done with the big home, done with maintaining property. She wanted to be close to family, to Emma when she visited, and to me. We had dinner together twice a week. She began volunteering again, this time at an elder abuse prevention center, sharing her story so others could recognize the warning signs. We also created the Helen Harrison Elder Protection Fund using part of the money Glenn had returned. It provides legal help to seniors facing financial abuse and funds education about power of attorney responsibilities. About a year later, Mom and I sat on my back porch watching another Toronto snowfall. She was wrapped in a thick blanket, holding a mug of tea. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked. "The way you tested us?" She was quiet for a long time. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that my own son could do what he did. But I don't regret finding out the truth. I had to know who would love me when I had nothing to give." "You gave me everything that mattered." I swallowed hard. "You taught me integrity. You taught me that doing the right thing matters, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." She smiled and squeezed my hand. "And that's why you passed the test. Not just because you visited me, though that mattered, but because even when you thought I was gone, even when you thought you were getting nothing, you still fought for what was right. You protected me when I couldn't protect myself. That's what real family does." She looked out at the falling snow. "Blood doesn't make you family, Douglas. Love does. Choice does. Showing up does. Glenn was my blood, but he stopped being family the moment he decided I was just something to be cashed in." We sat in comfortable silence as the snow gathered on the fence and bare trees. My phone buzzed inside, probably Emma calling from Vancouver. Life is going on. Mom turned to me. "You know what the saddest part is?" "What?" "If Glenn had just asked, if he'd just been honest about his financial problems, I would have helped him. Not with everything, not to enable bad choices, but I would have helped. Instead, he chose to steal. He chose to treat me like I was already dead, and that choice cost him everything." I didn't know what to say, so I just held her hand. This remarkable woman, who had survived betrayal by her own son, orchestrated her own rescue, and then used her pain to help others. That's the truth about real families. It isn't about blood. It isn't about inheritance. It's about showing up. It's about loving someone even when they can't give you anything back. It's about doing what's right, even when it means standing against your own brother. Glenn chose greed over love. He chose theft over integrity. And he paid the price, not just in prison time, but in the loss of his children's respect, his wife, his career, and his mother's love. As for me, I gained something far more valuable than any inheritance. I got more time with my mother. Real time. Time to talk, to laugh, to heal. I learned that when tested, I chose what was right, and I became part of something bigger, helping other families avoid what we went through. Blood does not excuse betrayal. The real family protects the vulnerable. And sometimes, the bravest thing an 85-year-old woman can do is pretend to be helpless, just to find out who will help her when she truly needs it. That's what I learned from Helen Harrison, my mother, my hero, the woman who taught me that dignity matters more than money, and that real love shows up even when there's nothing to gain.